Aphoristic appendage to On Truthtelling. 601 to 650. 601. What was the glacial mass that covered most of North America and parts of Europe during the last ice age if not a frozen ocean on land? What happened when a piece of cosmic debris, so goes one hypothesis, hit this glacial mass? The answer is that this frozen ocean on land became the flooding of the land. On this basis and this basis alone, so it is easy to believe about these ancient believers, various peoples in different parts of the world came up with flood myths and retained them over the course of time. 602. There's stuff done in private not fit to be put before the public except as a work of art. 603. A possible way of thinking for, about, or in the future is, don't be afraid of death. Opportunities after it are wide open. 604. Is a person now working, now thinking, now sleeping, now sexually aroused the same person, or one possessed first by one devil then by another? And what does it mean to be the same person beyond having a proper name, a personal and private memory, a body distinct from all others, and a socially acquired and biologically based identity? 605. In politics what often counts the most is perception. Facts can come, whether to affirm the perception or not, later. 606. The reason that perception counts for so much in politics is that one of its most common practices is persuasion, and that persuasion based on perception, no matter how shallow either one of them may be, gets immediate results. 607. Collectively, we put the blame on politicians for a lot of skullduggery that they in turn can wash their hands of by saying that it serves the public interest. 608. In the face of outside criticism, the corridors of power often prove to be equipped with an effective sound barrier. 609. What we love when we love is not only the one beloved but also our loving selves. 610. Sensationalism in science. Yes, even there it can make the difference between getting attention, that is, getting published, and not. But woe to those who come up with sensational stuff considered to be unacceptable or that falls outside existing paradigms. 611. To think that, when going into a senior citizen's home or passing a graveyard, it's virtually impossible to wrap one's head around what those people once were. 612. A. Regarding pornography, it takes me to where it tantalizes and where I cannot go otherwise. B. You're sinful. C. You're sick. D. You're sexist. A. And you three, whatever you may be individually or collectively, are certainly not the three wise monkeys. 613. A. In order to bring more honesty and justice into the world, would you be willing to accept a significant drop in your standard of living? B. There you have it. I'm afraid that, like virtually all other people, I have moral pretensions that, if push came to shove, would unquestionably fall short. It would seem then that these pretensions are more for ourselves than for anyone or anything else. A. And yet there are people who do try to apply these ideals to the rest of the world. B. Undoubtedly. But what percentage of the human race are we talking about? And even with these well-motivated souls, how often do we see them go off the rails? For it's one thing to have ideals in some personal or abstract way. It's quite another to try to bring them about in a social or political sense. A. I would hardly dispute that. But there are quite a number of people who, at times, are willing to get out on the street and fight for justice. B. And my cynicism doesn't run so deep as to say they don't sacrifice anything in the process. On the other hand, what would really be needed to change the world, and, by this, I mean something more than merely rearranging the moral furniture, would be lifelong commitments to the ideals in question from every single human being. I'm afraid we're far from that. 614. What is necessary for the adult is to be found in the child. And what is necessary for the child is to be found in the egg. And what is necessary for the egg is to be found in the species. And what is necessary for the species is to be found in the simplest forms of life. And, now, does it not seem the most erroneous thing to call the simplest forms of life simple? 615. War is that most horrible and yet most heroic thing that has helped to keep a historical memory. But now a corner has been turned and it threatens to wipe it out. 616. Those in power learn to lie easily for essentially two reasons, to serve themselves and to serve the greater cause. 617. It must be confessed that the way we look upon the world, the way we view things in general, including right and wrong, is deeply tied up with what we are as a particular person leading a particular life and thrown into a particular situation. The latter, being historical, cultural, social, religious, and political, goes a long way in constituting our knowledge, feelings, and identity. 618. In the moral or political sphere, nothing produces greater irritation than hearing bad arguments argued well, that is, with a certain amount of adroitness and finesse. 619. When politicians come out with dire reports loaded with accusations but short on details, beware, beware. 620. If one focuses on the world as a place where politicians can spin out lies, where the media can run with them, and where people can swallow them hook, line, and sinker, then there isn't much evidence of a so-called higher civilization. 621. A. Imagine all the people who had bitten the dust while he was still flourishing. B. Yes, and now he has bitten the dust. A. And no one should celebrate it too much, even if he was a monster, for in it is written all our stories. 622. It's becoming increasingly evident that all who play with strategic smarts on the world stage are more or less dumb actors in a play written by some god or devil whose genius has inspired him to come up with a tragedy to end all tragedies. 623. Do you see that anthill over there? Do you see how its inhabitants, its residents and citizens, hustle and bustle about? Do you see how hard they protect it and how much they expand and rebuild it? And do you think that these creatures don't care about it in some great and mysterious way? And then, to think of what can happen to such anthills, the destruction, the chaos, the colossal upheaval. Is this the ineluctable destiny of so much careful construction? Is this the destiny of all such craftsmanship and art as both natural and human process? 624. It may be that whole societies conjure up bogeymen and fen the fear of them to keep away the thought of the Damoclean sword hanging over their heads. 625. It must be admitted that some politicians, no matter how despicable, are amazing jugglers. How do they keep so many balls in the air? 626. If everybody's dark side were exposed to public view, what a rogues gallery humanity would seem to be. 627. With respect to the media nowadays, it seems that making as much money as possible means being as sensational as possible, polarizing public opinion as much as possible, slanting information as much as possible, and slandering some person or party as much as possible. All this while maintaining a good conscience, a straight face, and a professional look by, on the one hand, making these moves with a sufficient degree of craft and subtlety and, on the other, pretending that they simply don't exist as part of their operation. 628. It would be fair to say that, when it comes to their enemies, politicians feel they have a license to lie. It may even be that, in such instances, they consider it to be a virtue. 629. The greatest rogue nation in the world is most likely to be the most powerful for the simple reason that it can get away with the most. 630. In international affairs, might is not right in principle but in practice it both is and is not, depending on the circumstances. 631. I watch the ant. It gives the impression of knowing what it's doing. By contrast, I really don't know what it's up to. Ergo, the ant is much more knowing and intelligent in its sphere of activity than I am. But to feel this way, one must think of the ant as not only being caught up in its environment and the minutiae of everyday life but also mastering them. 632. Perhaps the most common or widespread form of foolishness is being certain about what is largely uncertain. Like all things, it cuts both ways but, in the long run, perhaps we should be grateful for this vain, fatuous, gullible, irascible element since virtually nothing would ever have gotten done without it. 633. One is never truly aggrieved by the loss of what one no longer loves or desires or has never loved or desired. 634. A. Thank God for scandal. Thank God for character assassination. Were it not for these, a large number of people, perhaps the majority of us, wouldn't be able to feel superior to the best human beings. B. You're joking, of course. A. I'm joking, in part. 635. Life is capricious. They were both 15, and, for the first time, they were alone together. They were out in the country on a perfect evening. In front of them was the stolid horse that pulled their wagon. Of course, they couldn't talk all that easily, but this mattered little since their eyes, their voices, their laughter, their expressions conveyed so much of the wonder, the charm, and the pleasure of their newly found mutual attraction. Oh, if only such happy dreamlike states could go on forever, thought the boy. But suddenly the horse, as if to break the spell and teach him a hard lesson, but with a certain animal humor, lifted its tail and shamelessly defecated. 636. Beware, beware, you, chosen people. Losing faith in yourselves and your destiny will be your destiny, since you no longer simply crush other people's but place ever greater demands on yourselves to be just and good. 637. In controversial matters, it is far more common for a person or party to try to occupy the moral high ground, to criticize, condemn, and even malign others, than to try to understand fully the opposing point of view. Apart from determining whether this itself is reproachable or not, it is perhaps worth noting that the second way of proceeding, the way of understanding, is one that, if not involving a lot more work, certainly cuts against the grain and is far more difficult to sustain. 638. In most cases, information is useful. In some cases, it is even vital. In other cases, such as when one has fourth-stage metastatic cancer, its value is questionable. 639. Among adversaries, one side generally hides its faults and failings while the other side not only exposes but exaggerates them. No doubt this has been the recipe since the dawn of time for much in human affairs that goes down in a less than agreeable way between countries and people. 640. What seems so personal and precious, that is, our consciousness and our feelings, our consciousness of our feelings, would be as nothing without the whole of life about us, without all the people about us, both living and dead. 641. We are blessed in life if much that has failed or is failing is overwritten by what has succeeded or is succeeding. 642. Sexuality and personal identity are two powerful forces that have the power both to converge with and confound each other. 643. Everything that is great but of hidden value must eventually be mixed with a certain amount of the mediocre if it is to become popular or profitable. 644. One party has a vested interest in exaggerating the importance of some newly discovered facts and ideas for economic, political, or aesthetic reasons. Another party has a vested interest in shooting down such facts and ideas because they are in opposition to its line of thinking. On one side, the liberal or revolutionary, on the other side, the conservative or institutionalized. Only a complex sorting out over time will tell us where the truth lies, or, to put it another way, whether the conservative or institutionalized side can manage to maintain the status quo, or whether the liberal or revolutionary side can go from being scorned and rejected to vindicated and accepted. 645. Happy children, wherever you may be. What would the world be without you? 646. Every age acts as if had just invented a perfect morality, at least in thought or theory, and that every previous age had just been stumbling around for it. 647. Polarization sets in when both sides of a difference or dispute feed to their adherents what they most want to hear as highest concern. 648. What? So, you don't have sex anymore? Then what have you lost? Something that never took up more than a fraction of your waking life even in the headiest days of youth. Or, to say it another way, 90% of the time it was only anticipation of having sex. 649. Calling one's work scientific to justify one's position or one's conclusions is not itself a scientific act but rather a political one. 650. In human society there pops up from time to time something so monstrous that it can't be found anywhere in the animal world, the willingness to cause immense harm and suffering to others for pure pleasure alone and for no other reason.